Good morning, everybody. I hope you're all doing good. This week we are going to start diving into podcasts. This should be a pretty short video. I'm just going to explain to you what your assignment is for this week. It's a pretty easy assignment. Um, since a lot of you might not be listeners to podcasts, I want you to go in and listen to a couple podcasts this week and fill out some reflections. All right. So you'll see here you have a podcast reflection to do. You can find podcasts on YouTube, Podbay, NPR, or ESPN. There's a bunch of other websites too, so you don't have to level it to that. I put a little awareness thing here. Just please be aware that podcasts don't always discuss topics that are appropriate. A lot of people make podcasts because they want to get away from the FCC regulations. The FCC is the Federal Communications something, I don't know what Federal Communications Commission. They regulate what can be on TV and what can't be on TV or radio. So some people will dive away from being appropriate on their podcasts or from their radio shows onto their podcasts. So if you want to say the F word on a podcast, you can, but on the radio, you definitely can't. Basically, is what I'm saying here. So if you're a little bit sensitive to things like that, just check around and see what the reviews are on that podcast, see if it's appropriate or not. If you're not sensitive to that stuff, don't worry about it. We're always talking about in here artistic expression, and this is another form of artistic expression. So if someone swears in their art, it's not a big problem. Yeah. Here's a quick definition of production that I wanted you to know because there's a question about production in your Google form that you're going to have to answer. Production is any sound effect, music, or special attention added to make a recording more appealing. So in a bunch of different recordings that you'll hear of podcasts, there's going to be some kind of music, yeah, or something else added to it. Some kind of sound effect, some voice effects maybe if you listen to some shows. But production can even go down to like what type of microphones people use and the way that something is recorded. Yeah. So just take a look at that. I put a list of the podcasts that I listen to every week on up here. Again, some of these because nothing's FCC regulated. A lot of podcasts you'll hear even on this list that I listen to every week are not. They don't use appropriate language, but that's because it's not FCC regulated. So if you want something that's more appropriate for yourself, feel free to find it on probably an NPR website or an ESPN website. I'll go through this list of what these are really quick. All Fantasy Everything is my favorite podcast as of right now. They take pop culture topics and they fantasy draft them, which means that they make about 5 picks per person of things, and they do episodes about random things like the mall or Taco Bell or what was one I was listening to a couple days ago, like summer nights, movies you want to live in, Canadians, just random things. And they fantasy draft, and they pick all these random people or places or things. It's a very entertaining podcast. The people that are on it are very funny. It's a comedy podcast. It's all stand-up comedians that do it. So, the Le Batard Show with the Stugotz, that's an ESPN podcast, so it's a little more on the appropriate side as far as it's regulated so they don't swear. Pardon My Take is a sports podcast by Barstool Sports. Barstool Sports, if you know anything about them, not FCC regulated for sure. Sports with Katie Nolan is another ESPN podcast. They don't always talk about sports, which is why it's sports with a question mark. Bodega Boys is Desus and Mero from Viceland, if you remember that show, or if you've ever seen it. It's cool. It's like a hip-hop pop culture podcast. Tights and Fights is a wrestling podcast, professional wrestling podcast. And All Songs Considered is it's a podcast that shows people new music. So if someone comes out with a new album that you might not have heard of, they put it on the All Songs Considered podcast. It's really cool. Really cool way to find new music. So I'm just going to walk you through your process really quick of where you would find a podcast. Say you follow this link to the ESPN site, and you're looking, okay, I want to try to play a podcast. Okay, this one looks good. Bootleg with Mina Kimes. It's about football. Great. So you do that. If you have to allow flash, that's fine. As you hear, it's got intro music.
Hello! Oh my god, that intro. It is way too cool for me.
Cool. So you'll hear on this, if you listen to this podcast, I listened to this earlier this week. It's pretty good. It's about football, and if you're into football, you might want to listen to this one. You'll see here, podcasts are long. This podcast is 1 hour and 6 minutes long. So this week you have to do 2 of these. So do not mess around. Yeah? Go in and listen to your podcast and finish up your podcast reviews. Because you only have 5 days to do 2. And if you're listening during class and not at home, you're going to be spending probably 2 days listening to each podcast. It'll probably take you about 2 days to do a podcast with a podcast review. Yeah? Make sure you put your full name, period, what podcast you listen to, some of the topics that people talk to in your podcast, and what the production is. That's all I need to know from you guys. Please do 3 sentences minimum. Please capitalize your letters. Please put punctuation. Yeah. If you do bullet points, I'm going to send it back to you. I'm not going to give you credit for it. You have to write in full sentences. I'm not asking you to do a ton. Please write your full name on the top 2, please. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right. There is podcasts about anything. So if you have any other suggestions for podcasts that you want to listen to, if you want to go look up the best gaming podcasts, go ahead. I can't guarantee that any of these are going to be amazing or good or bad. Podbay FM has a ton of them. They have all these different categories. So if you want to listen to an education podcast, you could find them. Yeah, there's one about speaking 2 languages. There's one about just TED Talks, The Average Joe, Spanish Coffee Break. Anything you can think of, there's a podcast for it on the internet. So have fun with this project. Make sure you do the 2 reflections and keep it going, okay? All right, if you have any questions, see you soon.